Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, I am excited as I can be to introduce our guest to you. But before I do, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com, the Mighty Quinn. That gets harder to say each time. The Mighty Quinn Brass and Winds are where we go here at the Willow School when we're looking for brass and woodwind instruments. And we suggest you also visit them. You'll get a great deal and a high quality instrument. Brassandwinds.com. You're watching Truer MU. I want to help you understand the truth about music, and we do that by talking to some of the best minds in the music world. And that being said, I'd like to introduce our guest to you. Richard Beauchamp is a pianist and educator with a fascination for piano technique. A student of Ernest Empson, he has performed on radio and television and appeared as a soloist with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. Since 1977, he has been the head of keyboard at St. Mary's Music School in Edinburgh, Scotland, and you can read everything he's written at musicandhealth.co.uk. Richard Beauchamp, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure. I usually begin with a story, and I didn't this time, to explain how I found you. And I will go ahead and tell that story now.
Yeah, sure.
I've been struggling with piano technique since I started playing the piano at age 6, and I've had 5 or 6 really good teachers and gotten something from all of them, but not everything from any of them. And I found you eventually through the internet and was very impressed, not only with what you knew about piano technique, but your attitude about it, your approach to it, your honesty and humility. And I wanted to, introduce you to the people in my audience who might have the same issues as I do.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Well, there are so many different ways of playing. That's the thing, that where there's so many neurodiversities, if you like,
Yeah.
that you just can't say this is the way to play the piano. You have to find what a person's setup is, what their physiology is, and how they think. Things can be very, very different. So that's the fascinating thing I think about teaching, is actually meeting new people. You learn so much you learn from them, and you have to find ways around working what they've got, what their physical setup is, and mental setup.
Yes, I think everyone who teaches would agree that when you teach, you have to take the person in front of you into account and address your teaching to them. But what you're saying is a real shot across the bow for some people, that there is no piano technique. Is there no bottom to this? No fundamental that we can count on?
There are certain physical laws, I think, which possibly
Gravity?
gravity is one of them. Direction of movement. You want the keys to go down. You want the hammers to strike the strings. You want to do it all with as little tension as possible, and getting the effect that you want. You don't want to damage yourself doing it. Those are all fundamental things, I think. There are many anatomical differences, but there are many similarities as well in the way the muscles work. And just because something works for you, you can't expect your pupil to be able to do the same thing, but you have to find out what they can do. But there are general principles, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is it? I think the ultimate question for me with piano technique is, given enough time and practice, is it possible for anyone to get to any level they want, or are there going to be peaks for everyone that are going to be different for everyone?
That's a very complex question, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good question. I think everyone's going to be different in what they can achieve, but I think everyone can achieve a huge amount, actually.
So the answer is that while everyone may not to be able to be the top pianist in the world, there's a lot of real estate between top and their best.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and achieving what they want to do. Unfortunately, there are many expectations out there by watching great pianists or great violinists, in Horowitz or Yuja Wang, a piano player, and young people think they have to be able to play that fast. Not everyone is set up with that sort of neural ability to be able to shoot those messages, chemicals around as quickly. And you have to accept a certain thing. But in the end, most music doesn't sound so good that fast. You want to be able to actually hear what's going on in the music. And
Yeah,
so that's quite a dangerous tendency to try and test yourself and push yourself to the limits.
I learned a couple things about Horowitz as I explored preparing for this. One of the things I learned is that you don't always hear, and you can tell me if this is not true, but that his piano was very special, and that he made sure the action was extremely light so that he could play fast. And so not only maybe we don't have his technique, but we don't have his piano, and your piano may be really stiff, and to expect to play fast on something like that is it's physically impossible.
This is true. I think that piano technicians can do fantastic work, and the most famous pianists have technicians that they have trailing them around and setting the pianos up for them. Horowitz, particularly, I think, liked to have the hammers harder so that he could get a very brilliant sound in the forte. But he was able to control the speed of the key so much that he could also play very, very softly. An incredible pianist, really.
Right, right. Just
Yeah,
because his piano had a light action doesn't take away from his technique. He had
no,
a fine-tuned instrument that he was capable of playing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and not to forget that Horowitz also quailed at in the presence of Art Tatum, which is an interesting thing.
That is interesting, isn't it? Yes,
So
yes,
so I prepared a lot for this interview because I wanted to know more about piano technique than I knew, so that I could talk to you intelligently. And I read a history of piano technique, a wonderful book. The author escapes me at the moment, but I'll put it in the comments of this interview. And he talks about 400 years of piano technique, and
yeah,
each time he talked about a different era of piano technique, I kept thinking, this is it. This is piano technique. And then each time another era would come along and say that was wrong. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
fascinating. Again, I know I've asked you this already, but where do you start when you're just looking? I mean, fingers, shoulders, ribs, no, just this, yes, this. Where do we go?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I could think what happens when I have a new pupil. First, I want to see what is natural to them, and then I want to see. Well, you have to be really careful that you don't actually screw them up by trying to change things immediately or trying to make them feel that what they're doing is wrong in a particular way. There are many different ways, but some things are plainly going to cause them more trouble. So you're looking at um, posture, they're looking at how much tension there is in the neck and head, sort of back head relationship. You're looking at the way they use their arms, whether the direction of movement is towards the piano generally or away from it. And quite often people are sort of, because of the sort of fight and flight reflex we have, that we tend to, I can probably just show that, probably, we tend to sort of curl up. And so the fingers come towards us, everything is clawed in, you get tighter here rather than opening out. And obviously that's going to be more efficient. You get that sort of thing, which is, I'm not surprised then to hear that people have pains in their arms and do that sort of thing. So I'm looking at that kind of thing, something that looks natural. I also, advise them to watch the old guys, the old pianists, because they've lasted and they haven't damaged themselves. And Horowitz and Rubinstein, Arau, all these people, they just use themselves really well.
Mm-hmm.
And you see very often that the thing they have in common is this thing of actually always moving towards the keyboard. The fingers are opening out, which is something I'd quite like to talk about, is the thing that when we were discussing the other day about watching videos, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and how you can tell by watching a pianist play which muscles they're using. Well, if you look at how the anatomy works for that, you've got quite a lot of muscles in the forearm, you've got quite a lot of muscles in the hand, and they're different in what they do. The muscles in the forearm are bigger, stronger, useful for carrying heavy loads and hanging from trees and that kind of thing, which they may have used to do on that one occasion. But they tend to work as solid muscles in a group, so that the tendons are all attached. the big muscle on the forearm is the flexor digitorum profundus, which is profound meaning deep. So that's the one closest to the bone. And that divides into four tendons, which attach to the fingertips, attach to the four fingertips, so that when you use that muscle, all the fingertips tend to move in together. And if you experiment with that, can you do that? Just holding your hand like that, and just bending one finger on its own like that. Keep the other fingers out straight. Yeah. Now, if you test the end of your fourth finger there, you'll find that the tip is completely floppy. If you test it with the other hand,
Yeah.
you can move it up and down.
Yeah. Let me get the camera back on me. I am trying this. Yeah. Okay.
And then if you then try to wiggle that joint, that final joint, or press against your hand with the joint, the other fingers have to come up. You see how they immediately become engaged?
Yes.
And that's because that whenever you play clenching that joint, and it's still, I'm sad to say, a lot of piano schools say keep your fingertips really firm, and the pupil as a result tries to claw in like this. That's tightening the hand up because all the fingers want to play at once at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you can see that if you're watching a pianist play, you can see, I don't know if you can see that very clearly.
Yes.
You can see that kind of action, very tight, with the fingers clawing in. So that one we want to avoid, which doesn't mean that we don't use that muscle at all. It works as a kind of limiter. It controls the shape of the hand, so we can draw in that muscle so that the fingertips are about there, or they're about there, or wherever we want it. And then when we use the intrinsic muscles of the hand to move the fingers follow that line wherever we've set it. So the fingers aren't just flopping about because, we're not actively using that. So there are other muscles, there are other differences in the hand. The other long muscle is the flexor digitorum superficialis, which is superficial, meaning higher, nearer the surface. So profundus is near the bone, superficialis is nearer the skin. And that attaches to the middle phalanges of the fingers. So that's the one you use for doing that, and that, and that, and that. But there are many differences in people, and for example, the tendon to the little finger is sort of being evolved out. Maybe we haven't found it useful for finding mates or getting food or anything over the last several million years. But so that's quite often absent now, which means that if you want to curl the little finger up, I've got it in that hand, but in this hand I haven't got it. And so you can see what happens, that I'm actually having to use the flexor digitorum profundus, which is attached to all the fingertips, and so the other fingertips go with it.
Yeah.
So that's something I can't do. And I had a teacher who got very cross with me once for not being able to do that and pass the little finger underneath other finger to curl it.
Have you had an X-ray to ascertain whether you're really missing this tendon?
No, I haven't. I just sort of know it's not there.
Yeah.
I think I made this something. So, and very often you find that's different. One hand is different from the other. Mm-hmm. And then
that's something I never thought of.
There are things where the index finger is very often separate from the other fingers. The digitorum profundus tendon is separate. In my case, it's not. You see, when I move my index finger, the third finger wants to come down as well. Mm-hmm. In my left hand, it's separate. Wow. So that's another difference you get, not only just between people, but between the hands.
I never thought of this at all, that there might be a difference between the hands. That's really confusing for anyone trying to learn how to play.
Well, it is, and it's kind of important for a teacher to know a little bit about that, because they could be insisting on somebody doing something which they actually physically cannot do. You have to find another way of doing it. There's something called Lindbergh-Comstock syndrome as well, which is where you get the thumb tip muscle pollicis longus up here has an attachment in here to the muscle that goes up to the second index fingertip, so that whenever you move that in, the thumb has to come in as well. Or if you move the thumb, that finger has to come in as well. And so some people, so if you're playing an arpeggio, if you're playing an arpeggio of C minor, for example, and you want to bring the thumb under, your second finger is going to end up like that when you put the thumb under. So you have to find ways of dealing with it. One possible way, depending on who you are and how you're made, would be using the intrinsic muscles of the hand, which I hope this isn't getting all too detailed and boring.
No, this is what we're here for, please.
So I notice people's eyes often sort of dull over and grey over when I'm talking about this stuff.
That's not our audience.
I'm all surprised.
Our audience is paying attention.
I find it's fun. So the intrinsic muscles of the hand are the interosseous muscles, between osseous bones. So the ones between the bones in the hand there. You have two sets of these, palmar interossei, which do that. They do that. They pull the fingers in together. They attach there, and on the back of the hand, they open the hand out. They pull the fingers away from the middle point. When they work together, they do that. And these are the great fingers, great muscles for piano playing when you want to move fast. These ones up here are great if you want to play octaves and chords and you want to play very, very loudly. You want to play the opening of the Tchaikovsky piano concerto, full force. You need these. And for these, if you're playing fast or if you're playing double notes, you need the fingers to move independently. So these are completely independent of each other, these muscles. And what they do is very hard to get your head around, I think, is that they actually attach. I don't know if you can see that. They attach there at the base of the fingers. And they also send a tendon around over the top of the fingers, going down to what we call the digital expansion, which is a sort of sheath of gristle down there, which opens these joints. So in one movement, they're actually moving the finger down and the finger opens out. Once you start doing that, you find the other fingers are completely free. You can move them around. That's even a cure for the one with the Lindbergh-Comstock syndrome, where you move the thumb at the same time. If you bypass that muscle, you're not actually doing that. The thumb doesn't have to react. If you're doing that, the thumb isn't affected by it, which is a great help. So it's sort of like, if you imagine your finger like a leg, so that's your waist, that's the knee, that's your foot. As you put your foot down, the knee opens out, and it's just a natural movement. It's not something you have to think about doing, you just let it happen. And once you start using that technique, I don't know if you can see that, but
yes, we can.
And even if you watch Horowitz, because he plays with his fingers he uses the finger pads a lot, which is another very interesting point, because I'll come to that later. So,
okay, I'll remind you.
But if you see that the muscles are doing the same thing, but there's not so much movement possible at this joint, so you don't see that opening out so much. So people assume that Horowitz isn't doing that, but in fact, he is. And you can see, if you really analyze those videos, you can see tiny movement there. So you play. It's very easy to play double notes because you can play that and these fingers are free, play that and these fingers are free. As soon as I start clenching the fingertips, that's tight, that's tight. You can't free them up. But just going back to the finger pads, they are amazing. I mean, they've got more proprioceptive nerves in them than any other part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of thing where you can tell textures of things, you can tell the difference between silk, of different kinds of metal, wood. You can feel that people who are blind use that a lot more than we do. They can tell how many dots and how they're grouped when they're reading Braille, which is something I find it really hard to get my head around, but they do manage to do that. So, but they also have a great sensitivity to weight. I mean, I'm told that people can actually tell the difference between a £5 note or a £10 note.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about UK money there for a minute, but I'm thinking, so just by the feel of the, so when you start using those fingers, you've got a much more sensitive, and you see Horowitz can sort of. He's using that position. Those fingers can really feel the weight of the key and control the speed of the hammer. If you start using those, you're much less sensitive. So that's quite interesting. So I'm talking too much.
No, I'm not stopping you because everything you're saying is really interesting. I did some study, took an exploratory tour of Taubman, and I read a lot about Amy Whiteside, and their approaches were to kind of not discount the fingers. Of course, you have to use the fingers, but their approach, Abby Whiteside believed everything was coming from the upper arm, whatever that meant. And, and I'm not discounting there, but I think it was never clear what upper arm meant exactly. Taubman, you've got the playing unit starting at the elbow, going to the middle finger. So they really kind of downplay finger action to protect the hands and replace it with rotation and movement.
Yeah.
What's your take on all of that?
I think they're absolutely right. It doesn't change the way the fingers work and the musculature works, but if you are really directing, I think right from teaching little kids, I make sure that the music feels as though it's really flowing up the back, down the arm, and into the key. So every note has that arm support on it, and I think that's once you get that going, particularly at the beginning. The fingers are not a problem. They begin to behave naturally. It's only when people start saying, curve your fingers, stronger fingertips, that's putting an artificial thing on it. So what I'm really doing is a lot of the time undoing that, just letting them work. But I mean, but Whiteside and Taubman are absolutely right that I think that if you start with this, the fingers will behave naturally. They will resist the weight of the key automatically and be supported by the arm. Much better technique. I think.
Go ahead.
So, no, carry on. No.
Well, no, I'd like to hear what you were going to say before I interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, I think you talk about arm support on the fingers, and people say, but how can you play fast if you do that? You can play. And you can do it up to quite good speeds, actually, with a visible movement there. But in fact, the body is so incredible that once you train it to use arm support, the fingers perform the same movement and use arm support without needing the visible movement. It's the same feeling, if you like. I don't know if you've read much of Tobias Mattei.
Not yet.
But I think it astonishes me because when I go back to those books, I read them very early on and then I thought, oh no, it's too complicated, it's rubbish, it can't possibly be right. He's an old man, he can't know anything. So all that stuff. So I come back and I read them now, and having read The Riddle of the Pianist's Finger by, I can't remember the name of the man, who talks about this movement. Mattei was describing that movement, what he called the bent finger touch, really early on. And he also talked about rotation, and he talked about playing from the shoulder. It's all there, but he clothed it in such complicated prose that it's very hard to come to grips with. But I think the thing that astonishes me is that you can use that at incredible speeds. And Mattei's description was the he wrote a book called the Visible and Invisible in Piano Technique.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're talking about rotation, for example, and we all can see rotation. Well, it's very useful just of changing position of the fingers. That's a very obvious kind of rotation. But rotation, in a way, is the muscles that make rotation are used all the time. They're supporting one side of the hand or the other, and this is what Taubman and Iva Galensky were into, I think, and I absolutely agree with that. I think it's wonderful. But you can practice with the movement, but then you don't need the movement. Not always. It's a matter of support for the fingers.
We should go into this just a little bit more. This is interesting. They did talk at the seminar I approached. They did say that you begin with this rotation and then it becomes small and then you don't even feel it anymore. But they didn't get into specifics about the disappearance of it. I know something from my Feldenkrais background about the way things integrate, but your concept of the idea of these muscles supporting instead of rotating, I think, is spot on, and maybe we should follow that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the idea that the thing that really sticks in a lot of people's throats when they first get the Taubman idea of playing a scale, but again, you probably know more about it than I do now because you've been to the actual place and studied there. But I've got all her videos and things, and I just find that it corroborates everything that I believe as well. But these things where you do a scale, you rotate the finger, and then you do a rotate back. So you get another one, then the thumb. Then you think, well, how on earth can I do that, at speed? Well, of course you don't. The thing is that what you've learned is how the muscles up here are actually supporting the fingers. And
you can feel that, and then you no longer need the movement because the muscles are still supporting the fingers without the movement.
Yeah. So in the early days of piano technique, people looked at the great pianists, and they saw very little. They saw very little movement. So they thought, right, thou shalt not move thy wrist. So this has to be. And they even had these things, didn't they, where you actually these bars they put along with a sort of groove gap in them where you put the wrist so you couldn't move it.
Right.
And you could only slide up and down. And of course, there were many injuries. Many people got injured. But because it looks like that, it looks as though you're not, but it feels totally different. It feels totally free.
Yeah, and I've been reading Otto Ortmann's book, The Physiognomy of Piano Playing. I think that's what it's called. And
so sorry, whose book?
Otto Ortmann. Are you familiar with this?
Oh yeah, of course, yes. Oh yeah. 1930s, 1929.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm about halfway through, and he makes so many good points in pretty clear scientific terminology. And in that point particular, he talks about the difference between, for instance, a teacher moving your hand the way they think it should go versus you moving it. The movement is the same, but you're not, when the teacher's moving it, you're not enacting any of the things you need to make the movement. So
no, that's right.
And so the same with a bar. Yeah, your wrist may be still, but you're not enacting anything that you would enact to keep it still. So it's not the same thing.
It's exactly. And I think Ortmann makes the point too that people see what they want to see.
Yes.
And that he did all these experiments by, attaching lights to the wrist and taking, delayed photographs. So you saw the patterns the wrist was making. And he said, teachers are trying to make people play with a steady line and not moving anything.
Right.
And they don't believe what they see. So that's a tricky one.
Well, yeah, that's another thing we were going to talk about. You've observed so many of these pianists, and as have I, but I think you've gotten a lot more out of what you've seen than I have. I've been mystified by most of what I've seen. My eyes have not helped me in this case.
Well, being mystified is very important, I think, to start with. At least you're saying that you're mystified, which
I'm happy to say I'm completely mystified.
I think I'm still completely mystified about. I think you have to be mystified to be any good at what you do. As soon as you think you know it all, you might as well give up, and you become a danger as a teacher. I think you're always trying to be. You should always be trying to disprove if you have a theory, you should be trying to disprove it.
Hmm. I have a good story to share with you. When I was at Georgia State getting my degree in music, I had a chance to go to a master class with Emmanuel Axe, and we had a chance to ask questions of him from the audience. And I asked him at the time, I could not play soft. I didn't really know much about color, tone color, or anything. And I asked him, "How do you play so quietly? How do you play so soft?" And his
Yeah.
answer was, "I don't know." He
He's
said,
a lovely man, isn't he?
yeah, he said, I just kind of went into the practice room and I just tried different things and saw what worked. I loved that answer. Like, oh,
Yeah,
that's what I should be doing.
yeah, so honest. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And a lot of times virtuosi are not necessarily great teachers and they can do things they can't explain. And sometimes the teachers that teach them take credit for these virtuosi's
yeah,
masterful things without
yeah.
knowing how they did it either.
That's right. They
Yeah.
they collect amazingly talented students, and so therefore it's a result of my teaching and this kind of thing. But I think for me, playing soft, degrees of tone color have always been very important to me. Getting the variety of sounds in a chord,
Yeah.
and what I do a lot when I'm teaching is trying to get them to feel the sound, to, as it were, hear with the fingers.
Mm.
Because we can do that sort of thing. We know that the hands are remarkable at speaking, at seeing, at all kinds of things. And the parts in the brain where the maps of the fingers exist are very close to the parts that we use for speech and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Feldenkrais said,
yeah.
sorry,
No, please.
Feldenkrais said something very interesting about organs. He said that when we're born, the function is stuck in the organ. In other words, your eyes see,
Yeah,
your fingers touch. But as we get older, the function is no longer in the organ. It universalizes so that you can,
yeah,
taste with
yeah.
your eyes in a sense.
And you can hear with your eyes. You can
Yeah.
hear, or also you can see with your ears. Is what I meant to say. See with your ears.
But I
I
do
don't know.
hear with my eyes. Yeah. When I'm watching other players, it makes a huge
Yeah,
difference.
yeah. But you can see with your ears. I don't know if you've come across this amazing man. He's he's known as Batman. I think he lives in America. His name is Daniel, and I've met him. And I was teaching a boy who was blind from birth, and Daniel had learnt to use. He's called Batman because he uses sound like
Yeah.
a bat, and so he can. The first thing this boy had to learn was how to work out where the corners were in a room by clicking, making things
Got
and
it.
hearing what's going on, and to hear where the door was. So as soon as I mean, if you do that and pass your hand across your face, you can hear it going across in front of your face. And Daniel's got to the point where he can ride a bicycle down a busy street with
Really?
traffic on it, and he knows where the cars are. And I've seen, I mean, I've spoken to him, and he can stand in a field, and he can say, well, there's a low fence over there, and there are three houses on the right, and there's a tall tree, and that kind of thing. And he's absolutely right. He can do that all just by the sound. So and when I asked him what it's like, he said, well, I'm kind of seeing it.
Yeah.
So that part of the brain, that information is feeding into that part of the brain.
Oh, that's
And I
fascinating.
think and I think that happens with the great musicians, that they hear a sound and they feel that sound, and the fingers are actually singing.
Does this help us with the dilemma of watching performers? Maybe relying on simply on our eyes is not enough. Maybe we need to be feeling what we're seeing when we watch these people.
Yeah, yeah. I think. Do you do you know about Raymond Thibert?
No.
He was a blind pianist in sort of late 19th century, and he was a pianist. He wanted to improve his piano playing, And he traveled around Europe getting lessons from all the most famous people, Busoni and Liszt and everybody, Cortot, and he couldn't see what they were doing, so he got permission to feel them while they were playing. So he was running his fingers up there, feeling what they were doing, and he said, without exception, they were all doing things that were different from what they said they were doing. And so he wrote a book about it. And there's a book by Harold Taylor, which is based on Tiberge's writings, and he relates it a lot to the Alexander technique as well. Mm-hmm. And the whole theory of him goes around the idea of lengthening into movement, expanding, not contracting, and it sort of all fits together in a funny sort of way. But I found that really interesting. And once you do, I had a colleague who was a wonderful teacher, and she had a boy who was extremely talented. And I was discussing with her the idea of rotation at one point, and she said, "No, rotation doesn't exist. You should never do rotation. It's not necessary." And this pupil of hers, you can actually see it. Wonderful rotation, using really, really well. But she couldn't see him doing it because she had decided it didn't exist. And the thing that happened then was this young man had a pupil, and he didn't teach rotation either. He still believed it didn't exist, although he did it.
Oh, geez.
You kind of get stuck.